When did you start doubting that things could get better? Maybe it did not happen from one day to the next. Perhaps your trust slowly faded after an answer that never arrived, a door that remained closed, or a situation that changed when you least expected it. You kept doing what was necessary, talking to others and fulfilling your responsibilities, but something inside you stopped feeling safe. Today, God wants to remind you that trust can be restored, not because all your problems will disappear immediately, but because you are not going through this moment without His presence. There is a psalm that was born in the midst of uncertainty and can help you look at your situation from a different perspective. It was not written from a life free of struggles, but from a heart that knew fear, and yet chose to turn its gaze back to God. Psalm 27 begins by recognizing the Lord as light, salvation, and refuge. David is not saying that he will never feel afraid. He is reminding his own soul that fear does not have to drive his decisions as long as God remains by his side. That can also happen to you. Trust does not always return as an intense emotion. Often it returns quietly when you take a breath before imagining the worst, when you stop interpreting a delay as a defeat, or when you choose not to measure God's love by the circumstances of a single day. Restoring trust is learning to walk without having all the answers, but knowing in whom you can rest while the answers arrive, or while you discover that some of them will take a different shape than what you had expected. Psalm 27 verse 1 presents a question capable of breaking the cycle of fear. If the Lord is my light, my salvation and the strength of my life, whom shall I fear? This is not a question that dismisses your worries. It is an invitation to place them before a greater truth. What troubles you today may be real, but also real is God's presence. Uncertainty exists, but it does not fill the entire horizon. There is a light that can still show you the next step, even if it does not light up the whole path right now. As we go through this message, we will gently enter into the words of this psalm. You will understand why trust does not rely solely on feeling strong, how to recognize the thoughts that are feeding your insecurity, and how you can rest in God once again without pretending that nothing worries you. We will also look at a deeply human biblical story, an everyday experience of transformation, and some simple practices that can help you bring this truth into your decisions, your family, and those moments when the mind tries to rush into the future. Before we continue, I want to ask you a sincere question. In what area of your life do you need to restore your trust? You can write in the comments what you are feeling, or complete this sentence today. I choose to trust God again with. You do not need to share details you would rather keep to yourself. A single word or a brief phrase can mark the spiritual decision you are making. If this message has already begun to bring a little clarity to your heart, please click like. That simple gesture also allows this word to find other people who are trying to restore their hope. Please confirm that you are watching and listening to this content on the official Mensajes de Dios channel. Some audio clips from our channel are being used and reposted by other channels without authorization. Subscribing, staying here, and sharing this video directly from the official channel helps us protect and support this work. We do not seek to fuel conflict, but to protect the original source from which each message was prepared to accompany you with respect, faith, and hope. Now allow the words of the psalm to speak directly to your reality. Perhaps you have lost trust in someone, in an opportunity, in your ability to make good decisions, or even in the way you hear from God. After certain disappointments, the heart learns to stay on God. It begins to believe that expecting little is the only way to avoid being hurt again. That defense mechanism seems to offer safety, but over time it can also preventing you from seeing the doors that actually remain open, the people who truly are trustworthy, and the help that God is already placing close to you. David expressed in Psalm 27 verse 4, one desire that put everything else in perspective, to stay close to God and gaze upon His presence. Before asking for his circumstances to change, he sought an inner place from which he could walk through them. That is where trust begins to heal. Not in the certainty that everything will go your way, but in the choice to draw near to God, just as you are with your questions, your weariness, and a faith. That might seem small today, because it could be that your trust hasn't actually vanished. Perhaps it just got hidden under too many disappointments, waiting for a truth powerful enough to awaken it. And the most important question is not just what made you stop trusting, but what your heart has been doing to protect itself ever since. That defense mechanism didn't just appear out of nowhere. it was built up. Every time you trusted when things didn't turn out the way you hoped. Every time a promise was left unfulfilled, or a conversation ended without giving you the clarity you needed bit by bit, your heart started guarding everything. A simple delay was no longer just a delay. It began to look like a warning sign that something bad was about to happen. A shift in someone's tone sparked questions. An unanswered text opened the door to conclusions that no one had actually confirmed. On the outside, you kept going with your life. You made breakfast, took care of errands, answered phone calls, and tried your best to make sure no one noticed how hard it was to stay calm. Yet, in the quiet moments, your mind kept drifting back to that same worry. You tried to anticipate every possible outcome, as if overthinking could stop something painful from happening again. This doesn't mean your faith is gone. It just means you being exhausted from waiting without knowing what will happen. There is a difference between walking away from God and simply not knowing how to find rest in Him. You can love the Lord and at the same time admit that a part of you feels insecure. You can pray only to find yourself minutes later mentally grasping back onto the very thing you had just surrendered. Psalm 27 does not show us a man who is a stranger to this struggle. David talks about enemies, dangers, and difficult days, but in the middle of that reality, he chooses to remember who God is. His trust doesn't come from ignoring what is happening. It comes from deciding which voice will have the ultimate authority within him. Inside you, several voices are also competing. One tells you to prepare for the worst. Another insists that you cannot afford to make another mistake. Yet another reminds you of everything that went wrong, using the past as proof that the future will be exactly the same. In the midst of all that noise, the voice of God doesn't always come as a shout. Often it draws near as a quiet certainty. I am still here. You can still take the next step. You don't know the end of this story yet. Maybe you've been asking for an extraordinary sign for a long time. And what you actually need first is to realize you already have company. The light mentioned in Psalm 27 doesn't instantly banish every shadow. It simply lets you see just enough so you don't have to walk completely in the dark. There are days when trusting means moving forward with a clear answer. On other days, it means stopping, taking a breath, and refusing to make a decision driven by fear. The trouble starts when the heart turns self-protection into a permanent way of life. To avoid another disappointment, it stops hoping. To avoid feeling vulnerable, it distances itself. To keep from losing control, it tries to control everything. That strategy might temporarily ease the uncertainty, but it also drains you, hardens you, and makes peace feel further and further away. God doesn't blame you for building up walls. He knows the exact experiences that made you feel you had to. His purpose isn't to tear them down brutally, but to show you which ones are no longer protecting you, and which ones are keeping you from receiving comfort, guidance, and companionship. Healing begins when you can. Tell Him, honestly, Lord, I want to trust, but there is still a part of me that is afraid. That simple prayer opens an important door, because behind that lack of trust, there is almost always, there is something deeper at work. It's not enough to just tell you that you must have faith. You need to understand what thought, what guilt, or what need for control is being quietly wearing away your trust. By looking more closely at what is happening inside you, you might discover that not everything you call prudence actually is. True prudence examines a situation and makes calm decisions. But an old fear, on the other hand, uses a past experience to declare that any similar situation will end the exact same way. Prudence helps you set boundaries. Fear, however, can make you close every single door, even those that could lead you towards something healthy. This difference matters because rebuilding your trust doesn't mean being naive. God isn't asking you to ignore red flags, to stay in relationships that hurt you, or to hand over major decisions to people who haven't shown they are responsible. Spiritual trust doesn't bypass discernment. It actually makes it clearer because you no longer have to make decisions out of a desperate need to protect yourself. Guilt can also disguise itself as responsibility. True responsibility acknowledges a mistake, learns from it, and tries to fix what can be fixed. But the guilt that lingers for too long keeps whispering that you are the mistake and that you don't deserve another chance. One helps you grow while the other keeps you staring at an old version of yourself. If every present decision is judged by a past mistake, trust will never find the room to return. Something similar happens with comparison. You open your phone and see that someone else seems to have moved ahead faster. Someone else got the news you were waiting for, achieved what you've been working so hard for, or shows off a seemingly perfect life. Without realizing it, you start using other people's results to measure God's love for you. You stop asking what the Lord is building along your own path and start wondering why your story doesn't look like theirs. Social media might show a single moment, but it never reveals the whole process. You see the celebration, but not the waiting. You see the open door, but you don't see the long hallways that person had to walk down. Comparing your entire life to a single isolated image forces you to compete in a race that God never asked you to run. The need for control also wears away your trust. You try to anticipate every conversation, preparing answers for problems that don't even exist yet, keeping every little detail under close watch. At first, it looks like responsibility, but then you realize that even when you're trying to rest, you can't stop mentally running through everything on your to-do list. Your body is in the room, but your mind is racing through future scenarios, trying to find a certainty that no one can actually give you. Healthy reflection can help you understand a situation. Daily anxiety, on the other hand, just spins around the same question without ever finding a new direction. A healthy reflection leads you, even if slowly, toward a decision, an acceptance, or a patient, conscious wait. But racing thoughts only demand another reassurance, another sign, and another guarantee. You don't need to feel ashamed for feeling this way. Human emotions are not the enemies of faith. Fear can simply warn you that something matters deeply to you. Sadness can reveal a loss that still needs to be acknowledged. Worry can point to a real responsibility. The trouble starts when we give a legitimate emotion the power to define our entire reality. Psalm 27 teaches us to place every emotion within a larger truth. David doesn't deny that there are reasons to fear, but he also doesn't let those reasons take the place of God. In verse 5, he expresses his confidence that in times of trouble, the Lord will be his shelter. This doesn't mean he will never face consequences or loss. It means he won't be spiritually abandoned as he goes through them. It is also easy to confuse protection with isolation. After being hurt, saying, "I don't need anyone," might feel like strength. But some burdens only grow heavier because you are carrying them all alone. Asking for help doesn't mean you lack faith, and it doesn't make you weak. Sometimes God's answer starts to take shape through a safe conversation, wise guidance, or simply the presence of someone who can listen without judging. Distrust can even extend to God himself, and it doesn't always show up in direct words. It appears when you think you have to convince him just to see you when you take every silence as indifference, or when you believe an imperfect prayer won't be heard. So you try so hard to find the right words as if sincerity just isn't enough. But God doesn't expect a perfect presentation. You can come to him with a trembling faith. You can tell him you don't understand. You can admit that you want to trust but still don't know how. That truth is far deeper than a fake confidence. The real battle might not just be what's happening outside of you. It could be the inner struggle to decide whether you'll live, guided by the hurts you already know, or by the presence of God that is still with you. That very struggle showed up in David's life during a journey when he lost the security he thought he had and had to find out where his strength would come from. David was returning with his men to Ziklag after several days away from home. The road must have felt familiar. Every step brought them closer to the place where they hoped to find rest, family, and a routine that could bring back some sense of normalcy. But even before they arrived, the landscape began to hint that something was wrong. The first book of Samuel, chapter 30, tells us that the city had been attacked and burned down. Their families had been taken captive, though the scripture makes it clear that they hadn't been killed. Those men arrived expecting a home only to find emptiness, destruction, and uncertainty. They didn't know where their loved ones were or what would happen next. The scene is deeply human. David didn't respond with some religious cliche, nor did he pretend that the loss didn't affect him. He and his men wept until they had no strength left. The Bible doesn't portray their tears as a lack of faith. Their pain was real and it needed to be expressed. In a matter of hours, David went from leading a group to becoming the target of their despair. The men were so bitter that they began talking about stoning him. They were suffering too, but they were looking for a place to vent their anguish. David had lost just as much as they did, and on top of that, he found himself all alone facing their anger. There are times when a person can feel this way, not necessarily because they've lived through a scene like that, but because several sources of security seem to crumble at the exact same time. A piece of news disrupts your plans, a relationship gets strained, and the very people you expected comfort from are also too hurt to stand by you. You try to hold it together, but you realize you can no longer lean on what used to hold you up. The story doesn't say that David stopped feeling pain. It says something far more precious. David found strength in the Lord, his God. That phrase in the first book of Samuel, chapter 30, verse 6, doesn't describe some sudden emotion that wiped away what happened. It points to an inner shift. When he didn't find any security in his surroundings, he returned to the relationship that was still there for him. Finding strength in God might have started with something as simple as remembering who the Lord had been in his story. Before knowing how things would turn out, David chose to seek God. He asked if he should pursue the raiders who had taken the families and if he would catch up to them. He didn't act out of pure desperation. He sought guidance. That small detail changes the way we understand trust. Trusting didn't mean sitting still and waiting for everything to sort itself out, nor did it mean running ahead blindly. David took his pain to God-received direction and acted on it. Faith became a concrete step. Along the way, 200 men were so exhausted that they couldn't go on. David kept going with the rest. The story keeps this detail because restoration doesn't always happen with full strength. Sometimes we move forward, acknowledging our limits. Not everyone can go the same distance, and not everyone recovers their strength at the same pace. Further along, they found a young Egyptian abandoned in the field. He was weak, and David ordered that they give him food and water. In the midst of his own urgent situation, he didn't fail to see a vulnerable person. That encounter ended up being key because the young man was able to guide them to those who had taken their families. Help appeared in a way that David probably hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a spectacular sign descending from heaven. It was a person found on the road, someone who could have easily been ignored because they didn't seem important. This also happens in life. Guidance can begin with a simple conversation, a brief piece of information, a pause that prevented a hasty decision, or help that came from where you least expected it. David and his men managed to rescue their families and recover their belongings. But the deepest part of the story isn't just in the final outcome. It's in the steps of the process. Pain expressed strength sought in God. Guidance received responsible action and help recognized along the way. When they returned, some of the men didn't want to share the recovered goods with those who had stayed behind because of exhaustion. David refused. He understood that victory didn't give them the right to look down on those who were weary. Recognizing God's grace transformed his way of treating others as well. True trust produces humility. If you believe that everything depends on your own strength, you might look down on those who need to stop and rest. When you recognize that you too were held up, you understand that someone else's exhaustion doesn't reduce their worth. Your story might not end exactly like David's. Faith doesn't mean copying the outcomes of a biblical story and demanding that all your circumstances follow the exact same sequence. Some things can be recovered, while others will have to be mourned and rebuilt in a new way. The true message of this passage isn't that you'll never lose anything important, but that a devastating journey doesn't have to define who you are forever. Before knowing how that day would end, David had to decide where he would look for strength. That decision was made while there was still smoke loss and unanswered questions. Trust began before the answers came. You too might find yourself in the middle of something that hasn't been resolved yet. Maybe you need information time, an honest conversation, or the courage to set a boundary. God can walk with you through every single one of those steps. His presence doesn't replace the decisions that you need to make, but he keeps you from having to make them completely alone. Psalm 27 and the experience of Ziklag meet at the very same point. David learns to look to God before he can see the whole path. Light comes for the next step. Strength appears for the decision right in front of you. Trust doesn't require knowing how everything will turn out. This truth might sound beautiful, and yet feel hard to apply to an ordinary morning, to an unpaid bill, or to a relationship. That's still up in the air. That's why it helps to see how a change like this can begin in the life of someone who doesn't feel strong, someone who simply got tired of living in constant dread of the worst. Yamina was 46 years old and used to wake up before her alarm even went off. She didn't do it because she had slept well, but because her mind would immediately start racing through her to-do list while the house was still quiet. She would turn on the kitchen light, brew some coffee, and check her phone hoping to find an answer about a job she desperately needed. For several months, she had been sending out applications and having conversations. That seemed promising, but none of them had turned into a stable opportunity. Every new attempt would start with excitement and end up fueling her self-doubt. She didn't know anymore whether to keep waiting change direction or just accept that maybe nothing better was ever going to come. That insecurity started creeping into other areas. Whenever someone took too long to reply, she assumed she had done something wrong. If she received any feedback, she heard it as confirmation that she wasn't good enough. In front of her family, she'd say everything was fine, but deep down, she was calculating how much longer she could keep going like this. One morning, she read Psalm 27. She didn't feel like all her worries to vanish, nor did she get any immediate news. What caught her attention was verse 14, which invited her to wait on the Lord, take heart, and strengthen her soul. Until then, she had always seen waiting as passivity and giving up. Those words showed her that she could also wait actively by making choices. She started with a small change. Before even checking her phone, she would sit for a few minutes by the window and slowly read a portion of the psalm. Then she would draw 2 columns in a notebook. In one, she wrote down what she actually knew. In the other, what she was just imagining. She realized that so much of her anxiety came from jumping to unconfirmed conclusions. They haven't gotten back to me yet. That was a fact. I'll never find an opportunity. That was a prediction. This conversation was difficult. That was describing an experience. Everyone is going to disappoint me in the end. That was a defense mechanism built from old wounds. Shamina still had hard days. Some mornings she went right back to checking her phone first thing. Other times the worry crept back in right before bed, but she started to notice that she wasn't automatically obeying every single thought anymore. She could pause and ask herself if she was reacting to the present moment or to some past experience. She also opened up to a wise friend and admitted she needed help sorting through her options. Together they looked at the possibilities, made some adjustments, and set a timeline for loose ends. Asking for help made her realize that trusting God didn't mean sitting back and checking out of her own life. Weeks later, an opportunity came up, but it didn't look exactly like she had imagined. At first, she was scared to take it because it meant learning something completely new. Before, her automatic reaction would have been to look for an absolute guarantee. This time, she prayed, gathered information, asked for advice, and made a decision without waiting until she felt completely secure. The biggest breakthrough wasn't just this new door opening. It was realizing that her peace of mind no longer depended on controlling every single outcome. Jimena was still careful, but she was starting to tell the difference between being careful and being afraid. She learned she could move forward without demanding. A promise from the future that no human could ever make. Maybe you see yourself in some part of this story. If so, type in the comments, "I am learning to trust again." You can. Do this as a simple way to honor your journey and support others who are also taking baby steps. You aren't claiming you've got it all figured out. You're just saying that fear won't have the final say in your decisions. Jimena's trust didn't just return overnight. It was rebuilt every time she chose truth over assumption, every time she reached out for help instead of isolating herself, and every time she brought a specific worry to God. Her story represents something so many of us can start to experience, not a flawless security, but a brand new stability. Even so, just knowing you need to trust doesn't always show you what to do when you wake up with your mind racing, or when bad news shakes you up all over again. Faith has to find simple ways into your daily routine practices that aren't magic formulas, but that help your heart remember where its safe harbor is. One honest way to start is to stop trying to impress God with fancy words. Prayer can be as simple as just naming what's going on. Lord, this conversation is stressing me out. I'm afraid of messing up, and I don't know how to wait without imagining the worst. Once you put a name to your worry, it stops being this vague, heavy cloud and becomes something tangible you can lay right before God. And you don't have to fix it during that very prayer either. Sometimes the very first gift of that moment is simply seeing clearly what is troubling you. Then you can ask yourself if there's one responsible thing you can do today. If there is, write it down. If there isn't, accept that overthinking won't suddenly bring an answer. Silence can help too. even if it feels a bit awkward at first. This isn't about emptying your mind completely, but about quietening the noise, competing for your attention for just a few minutes. Turn off your notifications, put your phone away, and sit in a quiet place. Breathe naturally and repeat to yourself a brief truth from Psalm 27. The Lord is my light, not like some automatic formula, but as a gentle reminder of His presence. When your body is tense, your mind can interpret that tension as proof that there is an immediate danger. That's why breathing slowly and relaxing your shoulders is not a lack of spirituality. It is a way of recognizing that you are here in the present and that you do not have to live inside all the scenarios you imagine. Scripture can show you patterns that go unnoticed. Divide a page between facts and fears. On the facts side, put only what you can confirm. On the other side, write down the conclusions your mind is spinning. Then ask yourself, what decision would I make if I weren't trying to avoid any possibility of disappointment? You don't have to obey the first answer, but that question can reveal how much power fear has gained. Reading a psalm slowly is different from rushing through it. You can stay for several days in Psalm 27. Notice which word stands out to you, which verse comforts you, and which one makes you uncomfortable. Maybe the phrase you need today won't be the same a week from now. Scripture is not a good luck charm. It's a meeting place that helps you remember God's character and examine your own heart. Worship can also shift your focus, not because a song erases your struggles, but because it allows you to stop listening only to your own thoughts. Choose something that leads you toward peace, not something that forces you to feel an artificial emotion. There are days when worship will be singing. Other days it will be being still and acknowledging, Lord, I'm still here. It's worth noticing how much content you consume when you feel insecure. Searching for helpful information can prepare you to make a decision. But spending hours scrolling through opinions, news, and other people's lives can heighten your sense of threat. Ask yourself if what you're watching informs you or agitates you. Setting a specific time to check messages or social media can give you back some mental space you didn't even know you'd lost. Rest is also part of the process. Fatigue makes decisions harder and makes a problem feel like it takes up your whole life. You won't always be able to sleep as much as you want or pause all your responsibilities. But maybe you can protect a few minutes of your day, cut back on an unnecessary commitment, or accept that you won't solve everything today. Boundaries are another expression of trust. Saying, "Chia, I need some time to think about it," can be wiser than answering out of fear of displeasing someone. Walking away from a conversation that has become disrespectful doesn't contradict forgiveness. Turning down a responsibility that is beyond your capacity doesn't mean you are selfish. Faith doesn't require you to remain available to everyone while you neglect yourself. Talking to a safe person can help you hear your own thoughts in a different way. Choose someone who doesn't feed your fear or minimize what you're feeling. You don't need them to decide for you. Sometimes it's enough if they just help you. Separate the urgent from the important facts, from assumptions and responsibility from guilt. These practices don't guarantee that your worries will vanish immediately, nor should they become new demands on you. You don't need to read, write, listen to music, handle every pending task, and have a deep conversation all in the same day. Start with whatever is possible. You could choose a 5-minute window when you wake up. Read the first verse of Psalm 27. Identify your main worry and hand it over to God. Then decide what your next concrete action will be. That small bit of order can prevent fear from setting the tone for your whole day. Another day, you might need to do something different. Pausing in silence before replying to a message, asking for clarification before assuming someone's intentions, or resting before making a decision. Trust grows when you stop reacting automatically and start responding with presence. There are situations that require specialized support, responsible pastoral guidance, or practical help. Seeking it doesn't contradict your faith. God can sustain you through resources, knowledge, and train people. Praying and asking for help aren't opposing paths. The question isn't how many tools you can manage, but which one can help you return to the present. Because it is in this day, not in some imagined future, that you'll find the grace you need to move forward. And that kind of trust has to survive beyond a quiet moment of reflection right in the middle of work, family, and real relationships. Trust becomes visible in your smallest reactions. It shows up when you get a short text, and instead of instantly assuming that someone is mad at you, you wait until you have more information. It grows stronger when you make a mistake at work and choose to fix it without letting it define your worth. Within your family, rebuilding trust might mean letting go of control over decisions that belong to someone else. You can walk beside them, guide them, and share your concerns, but you can't carry their journey as if it depended entirely on you. Loving someone doesn't mean shielding them from every consequence. At times, love is simply staying close without taking control of what isn't yours to control. In a relationship, faith doesn't ask you to ignore behaviors that need to change. Trusting in God can give you the clarity to have hard conversations, demand respect, and see if their actions actually match their words. Healing requires truth. You can't rebuild by pretending a wound never existed. At work, maybe the pressure has convinced you that you always have to prove yourself. You finish one task and you're already stressing over the next. You receive praise, but your mind only focuses on the one detail you missed. Trust allows you to work responsibly, without letting every outcome define who you are. It also shows in the way you use social media. You can celebrate someone else's progress without feeling like you're falling behind in your own story. Life doesn't unfold according to an algorithm on a screen. Someone else's timeline doesn't define yours, nor does it limit what can still be built within you. There are decisions that don't suddenly get easy just because you prayed. Sometimes you'll face two good options, with absolutely no certainty. In those moments, trusting might mean gathering the facts, checking your heart, seeking advice, and making a humble choice. If you later realize you need to adjust your course, that doesn't mean the whole journey was a failure. Fear demands guarantees, but wisdom looks for direction. Guarantees try to eliminate all risk, while direction gives you just enough light to take the next step responsibly. This difference can free you from waiting for a perfect sign before you move. Think back to the last conversation that left you feeling uneasy. Maybe you're still replaying it over and over, rewriting your replies and trying to guess what they really meant. Maybe you could just ask them directly instead of filling the silence with assumptions. If having that conversation isn't possible, you can choose to stop letting an unfinished story take up all your day. Peace doesn't always come because the situation changed. Sometimes it comes when you stop overanalyzing it in ways that only hurt you more. This doesn't mean downplaying a real problem. It means facing it without multiplying the pain with worst-case scenarios that haven't even happened. Psalm 27, verse 13 shows that David fully expected to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. His hope wasn't saved just for some distant future. He believed that God's presence could be felt in real, everyday life. That goodness might show up as an answer, but also as the strength to get through a season of waiting. It might come as an open door, a trustworthy friend, a necessary boundary, or the clarity to let go of an expectation that was slowly destroying you. It won't always look the way you imagined. And that brings up a tough question. If God is present, why are there seasons where he seems to stay silent? How do you rebuild trust when you've prayed with all your heart, yet everything around you stays exactly the same? God's silence isn't proof that he has abandoned you. Still, just saying that doesn't make the discomfort of waiting. There are times when you read the Bible, pray, and try your best to do the right thing, but you don't get a clear answer. The door stays shut, the relationship remains unresolved, or the news you've been waiting for never comes. A mature faith doesn't need to make up an explanation for every single delay. It wouldn't be honest to claim that every delay happens just because God is preparing something much bigger for you. Some situations are just tied to human decisions, processes that take time, or circumstances we just don't understand. There are also questions for which we might never get a full answer. Psalm 27 doesn't hide this tension. In verse 9, David begs God not to hide his face or abandon him. It is the prayer of someone who knows what it means to trust, yet deeply fears not feeling the closeness he so desperately needs. The Bible allows both of these experiences to speak through the very same voice. You can believe and still ask questions. You can wait and still admit that you are exhausted. Honesty doesn't threaten God. He doesn't need you to fake confidence just to stay close to you. In the midst of the silence, something might be happening deep inside you, even if nothing seems to change on the outside. Maybe you are learning to set a boundary you used to avoid. Maybe you're starting to realize that your worth doesn't depend on getting an answer. It could be that a certain expectation is losing its power to steal your peace. Now, this doesn't explain away all suffering, nor does it turn every single delay into a lesson custom-made just for you. It simply shows that an uncertain season doesn't have to be completely empty. Sometimes the answer doesn't come as a clear certainty, but as the strength to get through the day. You get up, do what needs to be done, and find a brief moment of peace. You talk to someone who helps you sort out your thoughts. You remember a verse from a psalm, right, when worry starts to take over. None of these things solve everything, but they can be signs that you aren't spiritually alone. Waiting on the Lord, as Psalm 27 verse 14 says, doesn't mean pretending time isn't passing or standing completely still. It's keeping your heart open to God's guidance while you keep living responsibly. There are doors you will have to knock on, conversations you will need to start, and decisions that nobody can make for you. But there are also times when waiting means not forcing an answer. Feeling rushed can make you accept less respect than you deserve. Commit to something you don't fully understand or go back to a toxic situation just because the silence feels unbearable. Not all action is progress. Sometimes pausing is what keeps fear from making your choices for you. I want to invite you to answer a question in the comments below. What do you need to remind yourself of during the silence? You can write, God is still with me even when I don't understand yet. This isn't a way of pretending that waiting is easy. It's a conscious choice not to mistake a lack of answers for the absence of God. When you read those words again on a hard day, remember that the divine presence isn't always measured by what you feel. A room can seem totally quiet and yet still not be empty. A season in your life can feel stuck and yet you could be gaining clarity, dignity, and a brand new way of responding. Silence doesn't mean you have to put your life on hold. You can keep caring for your family, learning, working, resting, and building healthy relationships. Your story isn't on pause just because an answer hasn't arrived yet. So the question starts to shift. It's no longer just about how much longer you have to wait, but who you are becoming while you wait. Because waiting can either trap you in constant anxiety or it can become a space where you reclaim your identity and start participating in your own life again. Waiting with maturity doesn't mean sitting in front of a closed door until you forget every other area of your existence. You can deeply long for an answer, and at the same time, keep nurturing what's already in your hands. Maybe you need to organize your finances, have that hard conversation you've been putting off, or learn a new skill. Perhaps it's time to rest, reconsider a boundary, or accept that a certain plan needs to change. None of those steps force to give up hope. On the contrary, they can keep your waiting from turning into paralysis. Time can also reveal your true motives. Some things that seemed absolutely essential lose their grip once you find your calm again. Others only prove their importance. True discernment takes space because urgency often mistakes anything that promises a quick escape from uncertainty for a real need. Do not glorify suffering. A wound doesn't become a good thing just because you learned something from it later. There are losses you would never have chosen, injustices that should never have happened, and the choices of others that brought real consequences. God does not need to call good what was painful just to meet you in the middle of it. His presence can help you avoid remaining a prisoner of a season you didn't choose. What happened is a part of your story, but has no right to write every page ahead. You can honor what you lost and at the same time, allow something new to begin. Waiting with maturity also restores your identity. If you've been waiting for months for an opportunity, you aren't just someone waiting for an answer. If a relationship ended, you aren't simply the one who was left behind. If you made a mistake, you aren't defined by that single decision. Before any outcome, you are still a life worthy of care, truth, and purpose. Psalm 27 doesn't end with a detailed explanation of every threat. It ends by inviting your heart to take courage while waiting for the Lord. Biblical strength doesn't always look like a person who never cries. It can look like someone who weeps and then gets back up, asks for help, corrects their course, and keeps a part of their heart open to hope. Choosing to keep living while you wait is a quiet declaration of trust. You prepare a meal, keep a commitment, walk in the morning light, and respond with kindness, even when there is still an unanswered question. That is how you remind yourself that no uncertainty holds all of your existence. As you start moving again, some of your inner wounds will become clearer. They are no longer hidden by the desperate urge to find an answer. The fear of abandonment emerges, the struggle to trust and the need to control. Far from being a step backward, recognizing these things can be the doorway to a deeper healing. The fear of abandonment can make you read any distance as rejection. A delayed response triggers old memories. A change of plan seems to prove that you don't matter. So you try to cling, over-explain, or brace yourself for a goodbye that hasn't even happened. God can help you. Tell the difference between the present and the past. The person who is slow to reply today is not automatically the one who let you down years ago. At the same time, seeing this difference doesn't mean ignoring patterns of behavior. You can look at reality clearly without letting an old wound finish the story ahead of time. After a betrayal, trusting again can feel incredibly foolish. Your heart sets strict rules. Never depend on anyone. Never share too much. Never let yourself be vulnerable. Those rules protect you from certain risks, but they can also keep out honest connections. Healing doesn't ask you to trust everyone in the same way. It helps you rebuild trust, gradually as you observe consistency, respect, and care. Exhaustion also shifts your perspective. When you have carried too much for too long, even a tiny task feels impossible. In that state, you might judge yourself harshly and believe you've lost your faith. Maybe you don't need condemnation, but rest, support, and permission to admit your limits. The feeling of not being enough is often fed by comparison and impossible expectations. You think you should have moved past everything, known exactly what to do, and stayed perfectly calm at all times. But that is not how a human life unfolds. Growth is full of hesitation, adjustments, and days where you just need to start over. God does not only walk with you when you present your best self. Psalm 147 verse 3 speaks of the Lord who heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. This is not the picture of a God who is impatient with your pain, but of a presence that approaches with care. Healing doesn't always mean forgetting. It can mean remembering without emotionally reliving the same scene every single day. And it can mean that you are able to talk about what happened without feeling like your identity is disappearing inside that memory. At times, it means letting go of looking for an explanation from someone who is never willing to give you one. The forgiveness, when it's part of the process, doesn't erase boundaries or force you to restore every relationship. You can let go of the desire to live tied to an emotional debt, and at the same time, keep the necessary distance. Peace doesn't require you to call someone safe when they haven't proven themselves to be. When faced with the need for control, healing begins by recognizing what is actually yours to carry. You can watch over your decisions, ask for clarity, prepare what's necessary, and act with integrity. You can't control every single opinion, reaction, or outcome. Letting go of that isn't indifference. It's accepting our human limits. God can give you the dignity to stop chasing approval, the comfort to walk through loss, and the courage to ask for help. None of these changes have to happen all at once. A wound that took time to form usually needs patience and care. Look at yourself with the same compassion you would show to a loved one, not to justify everything, but to create a space where the truth can be heard without feeling humiliated. Shame says you have to hide until you're completely fine. Grace invites you to step out of the darkness while you're still learning. Rebuilding trust doesn't mean going back to the person you used to be. Maybe you're building a wiser way of trusting, less naive, more self-aware, less dependent on human promises, and more deeply rooted in the character of God. From that place, words of faith stop being a denial of reality. They become a calm response to it, a way of reminding your heart that while fear might speak, it no longer gets to make all the decisions. Today, I realize I don't need to understand every single detail to take a responsible step. I can gather the facts I have, pray honestly, and move forward with humility. If I have to correct my course later on, God will still meet me there too. Fear may speak, but it isn't the only voice inside of me. Its warnings will be tested in the light of truth. I won't turn every delay into rejection or every change into a threat. I will learn to ask questions before assuming and to breathe before reacting. I don't need to punish myself forever for decisions I've already acknowledged and tried to make right. Taking responsibility helps me grow. Constant condemnation keeps me bound. With the help of God, I can learn from the past without letting it control my future. My story isn't defined by the season that worries me today. There is life all around this waiting. There are people. I can love tasks. I can perform rest I need to receive, and small moments of kindness that I can still appreciate. The Lord is still my light, even when I can only see the very next step. I won't demand that the whole path be lit up before I start. Having just enough clarity for today is also a way of being cared for. I can set boundaries without feeling like I've stopped loving. I can ask for time, say no, and walk away from whatever keeps hurting me. God's peace doesn't force me to stay in a place where I lose my dignity. Not everyone will hurt me the way others did. I will learn to watch people's actions, consistency, and respect. Trust will be built gradually without rushing and without relying on promises that reality doesn't back up yet. God can still surprise me in ways I never even considered. I won't turn this possibility into a demand, nor will I try to decide in advance how he should answer. I will keep my heart open to a different direction. When I don't feel like I'm getting an answer, I'll remember that silence doesn't mean abandonment. I can tell the Lord that I'm exhausted, and I can keep coming to him without having a perfect prayer. Being honest is also an expression of faith. From today on, I will try to separate what I know from what I fear. My thoughts deserve to be heard, but they don't all describe reality. A painful prediction doesn't become true just because it's repeated many times. I can ask for help. I don't need to carry every burden in secret to prove my strength. God can use a conversation-wise guidance or the presence of someone safe to sustain me. Being tired doesn't define my worth. If I need to move slower today, that doesn't erase the path I've already walked. Resting can be a way of protecting the strength I'll need tomorrow. Comparison won't determine my pace. Someone else's progress doesn't mean I've been forgotten. My life doesn't have to look like someone else's to have purpose. Today, I choose to treat myself with truth and compassion. I will recognize what I need to change without speaking to myself with contempt. Grace doesn't remove responsibility. It creates a space where I can face it without being destroyed by it. Even if uncertainty is still there, I'm not completely in the dark. Psalm 27 reminds me that God is light, refuge, and companion. That truth doesn't deny my questions, but it keeps those questions from taking up all the space. Trust can return in a deeper way. Maybe it won't return as a loud certainty, but as the calm to wait, the wisdom to decide, and the freedom to accept that not everything is under my control. I don't need to feel every one of these words with the same intensity to let them begin working in me. It's enough to choose one truth and carry it with me. Faith also grows through quiet repetition. Returning to God, returning to the present, and returning to the decision not to live ruled by fear. After recognizing these truths, your heart doesn't need to keep building up intensity. It needs to rest. Trust grows stronger when it also learns to be quiet, to release the weight of your body and to stop trying to solve in your head what cannot be finished tonight. Find a comfortable position that works for you. You don't have to force any special feeling. Let your shoulders rest and relax your hands. For a few moments, let your breathing find a peaceful rhythm. You're not trying to forget your responsibilities. You're just admitting that you can't carry them all at the same time. This moment doesn't need to hold the entire future. It only needs to receive you exactly as you are. Think of one specific worry. Don't choose them all. Bring just one to mind, that pending conversation, the decision that is troubling you, the person you are worried about, or the answer that hasn't arrived yet. Notice how much space it has taken up inside you. Maybe you've carried it while working, eating, and trying to rest. It might have tangled itself with other fears until it seems bigger than what you can bear. You don't have to solve it. Right now, you can just acknowledge it and say, Lord, this is what I can't control today. Breathe gently. As you inhale, remember that you are still here. As you exhale, let your body let its guard down a little. God doesn't need you to stay tense to protect what matters to you. The house might be quiet, or maybe you hear sounds around you. Don't fight them. Let this moment exist right here in real life. God's presence doesn't require a perfect setting. Remember the words of Psalm 27. The Lord is light and refuge. You don't need to imagine a blinding light. It can be enough to think of the soft light coming through a window at dawn. It doesn't show everything at once, but slowly lets you see what was hidden before. Maybe today that light is simply recognizing that you need to wait before you respond. Maybe it's the quiet certainty that you must ask for help. It could be the permission to rest or the courage to accept that an expectation will have to change. Give thanks for the clarity you already have, even if it's small. Now, set aside for a moment the questions that start with, what if? You don't have to answer them. When one pops up, you can say, "That isn't happening yet. I will come back to today." Returning to the present doesn't erase the future. It keeps you from having to live it ahead of time. Your worth won't increase when the answer arrives, nor will it decrease if the outcome is different from what you expected. You are more than this. Wait. You are more than the opinion of one person, a closed door, a loss, or a mistake. Let this truth settle inside you without effort. You don't need to repeat it over and over. Just receive it. God can meet you exactly where you are. If you feel tired, don't hide it. If there is still fear, don't try to force it out. Just bring it forward simply. Trust doesn't begin when you stop feeling, but when you no longer have to face your emotions, completely alone. In a few moments, we are going to pray. It won't be a prayer to demand results or to pretend that we understand everything. It will be a space of surrender where you can lay down before God whatever is worrying you and ask for a trust that can carry you through the process. Keep in your heart that one specific worry you chose. You don't need to explain it with perfect words. God already knows the situation, the people, and the parts you don't even know how to express. Let the noise inside you quiet down. You've done enough for this moment. You can rest from the need to anticipate, watch, and control. With that honesty, we bring our hearts close and say together, "Beloved, Father, beloved Father, here we are before you with our faith, our questions, and everything we still don't know how to resolve. We don't want to pretend to have a strength we just don't feel today. We come just as we are, trusting that your presence doesn't depend on the perfection of our words. You know the worry that each person has carried up to this moment. You know what answer they are waiting for, what conversation they dread, and what part of the future feels uncertain. Look with mercy on that heart tired of expecting the worst, and remind it that it doesn't have to go through this day without your company. Lord, be our light. We aren't asking to see the whole path at once. Give us clarity for the next step. Wisdom not to act out of desperation and patience, not to force what simply needs time. When fear tries to use the past to predict the future, help us return to the truth. Let us recognize the signs that actually need our attention without turning every delay or change into a threat. Teach us to distinguish caution from distrust and responsibility from guilt. Bring rest to the mind that is being constantly on guard. May our bodies release all this built-up tension, and may our thoughts slow down. Remind us that we don't have to figure out all the outcomes just to be prepared. Father, walk beside those who have lost trust after a disappointment. You know how hard it is to open our hearts again when a promise has been broken. Give them the discernment to build healthy relationships, set boundaries, and recognize the people who act with respect and consistency. Embrace anyone who feels abandoned. May the distance of another person never make them forget their dignity. Help them not to chase after approval or accept less care than they need out of fear of being alone. May they find safe companionship and the courage to ask for support. Look also upon the families represented in this prayer. There are worries we simply cannot resolve for those we love. Give us the serenity to walk beside them without trying to control, to speak with love, and to accept the limits of our responsibility. Protect our relationships from words spoken in exhaustion, and teach us to listen with patience. We lay before you our practical needs, our work, our finances, our decisions, and the doors that still haven't opened. Guide us toward responsible actions. If we need to learn, show us where to start. If we must wait, sustain us. If it's time to change direction, give us the humility to admit it. Don't let comparison steal our gratitude. When we see others making progress, remind us that their results don't define our value nor explain our own path. Help us live this day without feeling like we are running late to our own story. Forgive us for the times we tried to control every single detail because we were afraid of hurting again. Don't condemn us for the walls we built to protect ourselves. Gently show us which ones we no longer need. Give us a wise trust, one that is able to love without being naive, to wait without being passive, and to move forward without absolute guarantees. Lord, when you are silent and we cannot understand, keep our hearts close to you. We don't want to make up explanations for everything that hurts. We only ask that your presence sustain us in what still has no answer. Like David in Psalm 27, we want to remember that you are our light and our strength. If our faith is small today, please accept it. If we can only take one step, walk with us in that step. If we need to stop, teach us to rest without feeling guilty. Restore our ability to recognize your goodness in daily life, in the morning light, in an honest conversation, in the food, on the table, in an idea that brings clarity, and in the person who approaches us with respect. May these simple things not go unnoticed while we wait for something bigger. Bring order within us so that facts are not confused with fears and assumptions do not rule our decisions. Before we answer, give us calm. Before we give up, give us perspective. Before we keep knocking on a closed door, give us discernment. Today, we surrender what we cannot control, not because we've stopped caring, but because we recognize our limits. We trust that you can take care of us even when the outcome looks different from what we imagined. Grow a realistic and firm hope within us. A hope that doesn't deny our losses, but also doesn't let them define everything ahead. Remind us that we can rebuild, learn, ask for help, and start over. Thank you for listening, even to the prayers that come, broken by exhaustion. Thank you because your love doesn't pull away when we have questions. Thank you that we can return to you as many times as we need to. We leave this worry in your hands. If it returns to our minds, help us surrender it again without blaming ourselves or thinking that we have failed. Rebuilding trust can simply mean coming back to you every single day. May your peace be with whoever is listening to this message. May they rest tonight, or as they begin their day, find the strength to live it without worrying about tomorrow's troubles. In Jesus' name, amen. Stay still for a moment. You don't need to rush to pick back up what you've just surrendered. The answer may take time, but this moment of rest already has value. If this prayer touched your heart, please share this video with someone who needs to find their trust again. Subscribe to official messages from God and come back to keep receiving messages of faith, comfort, and hope from our official channel. Every like, comment, and shared video from the original source helps us protect and continue this work. Today, you don't need to see the whole path. If God is still your light, you can still take the next step.